Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is the first episode in this idea that my friend and I, Erica Mather, and I had, Yoga Business Heartbeat. And our topic for our first episode today is the relationship between yoga teacher and yoga studio owner. So before we dive in, I want to introduce myself and also have Erica introduce herself. So my name is Kiki Lovelace, and I am a Forrest Yoga guardian. That's actually how I know Erica, because we are both guardians. And I'm also a studio owner. I own Interstellar Pilates and Yoga Studio here in Berkeley, California. And I'm also the founder and lead business growth mentor of my 12-week coaching program that I designed for other Pilates, yoga, and bar studio owners. It's called the Thriving Studio Owner Program. And Erica and I, we met probably on my first, I want to say, Erica, on my first guardian retreat when I was a baby guardian in training. And we just got on really well from the second we met. We were roommates that weekend in Colorado, and I think in 2012. And we connect on so many levels, Erica and I, but one of the levels that we love to connect on is talking shop about yoga business. So that's really where this came out of. So before we get into it, Erica, you want to introduce yourself to our viewers today?
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to say, Kiki's looking the studio owner part. I'm looking like the yoga teacher part. I'm like wearing a tank top and moving around because I'm on my couch and there is my cat. So anyway, I'm in New York City, and part of, I think, what makes this special and unique is that Kiki and I are representing different markets in North America, right? So there's the East Coast, there's the West Coast, and part of the idea of the title, Yoga Heartbeat, was just like, let's put our finger on the pulse of what's happening on the East Coast, on the West Coast, for yoga teachers, for yoga studio owners, and, just keep the information flowing. There's a lot of information out there. Anyway, I am also a Forrest Yoga trained teacher. I'm a Forrest Yoga guardian as well. I've been teaching and practicing in New York City since 2004. I started teaching in New York City in 2006. And basically what I do is I freelance and I work at a studio, and I work with a lot of private clients. And the relationship between those particular aspects of my business is always changing and growing. And Kiki and I are here to talk about that because, as she said, we sort of vibe around this business thing, and we touch base with one another periodically, like, what's going on in your market? How are people responding to this? What's happening? So, and it's always interesting to see, like, is it just me? Or is there a broader trend that's occurring? And that's part of what we want to talk about, like the local elements that are affecting you, and then the broader trends that are also affecting you.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. Yeah, it's true. And I want to say, before we kind of get in and dive into this topic today, I was thinking a lot about why is this relationship between yoga teacher and yoga studio owner such an important partnership? And so I just want to take it way out there into overview for a moment. And I've been really feeling into this lately, that without my team of teachers and administrators and front desk people, I can't live my purpose as not only a yoga teacher, because I do teach several classes a week, but also as a leader and as a business owner, and as someone who is willing to take the risk and responsibility of having a brick and mortar space and being responsible for payroll and all those other things. But really, my purpose is to have as much impact as possible and give the gift of yoga to as many people as possible in my community. And I can't do that by myself. And so that's why I think, I think for going on the other side, yoga teachers need yoga studio owners. If we were all just trying to do everything by ourselves, it wouldn't be nearly as powerful as when we come together and are housed under one roof. So I want to acknowledge that as we get into this, is that this relationship between yoga teachers and yoga studio owners is a sacred one, It's a powerful one. It's one that needs to be nurtured because it allows each of us to serve our purpose and also make a living serving our purpose. You know, like for a lot of us, if we didn't get paid as studio owners, and as teachers, we wouldn't be able to do this. Like, it's not possible without getting paid. So I think we need each other. And that's really what I want to start with saying is like, we need each other, you know?
We do need each other.
Yeah.
We do need each other. And I think, sometimes I see yoga teachers don't understand the expenses that are involved in running a yoga studio. And it's very hard to understand that if you've never actually gone about doing it yourself. And then a lot of people go about doing it and then they're like, oh no, I just wanted to teach yoga and now I don't teach yoga. And I also don't make any money because the overhead is so high to have a brick and mortar space. And that can be a real eye-opener for a yoga teacher. And then they swiftly retreat back to just teaching yoga because the overhead is really low to just teaching yoga. Particularly, the way that I do it, and I think the way a lot of people do it in New York City is we actually make a living mostly by doing private work. And the studio work actually isn't that profitable for us as teachers, and you know that, right? It's not that profitable, but it's like a necessary aspect, I think, of yoga teachers' income stream and a necessary aspect of their public profile, right? Also to give people access to you. But the truth is that nobody's making a living teaching yoga at yoga studios, as far as I can tell. Maybe a select few in New York City, either because they hustle a lot or because they're in unique situations where they're getting paid per head at a studio that does very well. But even studios that do very well don't do very well forever. That's not something that we can rely on. So anyway, point being that the overhead for teaching privates is very low. And that's one of the things that's attractive, I think, about teaching privates, particularly the way we do it in New York City. Most of us do house calls. So the overhead for us is basically our time and a subway fare. That's it, our time and a subway fare. And you can make that work. But I realize also in New York City that we can make it work because there is a monetary value placed on yoga privates that is commensurate with the cost of living here, right? And there's an abundance of people who want their time saved or have special needs. And so people will pay for private yoga, whereas perhaps if I went back to my hometown, Madison, Wisconsin, I wouldn't be able to make my living the same way, which I just want to point out because I think a lot of what we talk about in terms of the heartbeat thing is regional. You know, it's regional and it's specific to particular markets. And I see sometimes and I don't know if you've noticed this, that in places that are less urban centers or there's less population density, a yoga studio can do really, really well very easily in a lot of ways because it's the only access. Have you noticed that?
Yes and no. I mean, most of my yoga studio owners that I'm working with are coming to me because they have cash flow challenges, and because they're not actually reaching as many people as possible. I mean, so far of all the mentees I've ever worked with, I have the highest rent of anyone I've ever worked with, and so my expenses are so much more. And yet the price point across the United States is pretty much the same. It's very similar. For classes, it's very, very similar in my experience of talking to different studio owners. We have similar price points in terms of what we charge. We also have similar pay scales in terms of what we pay. And yet I'm carrying, almost an $8,000 a month rent. And, some of my studio owners are paying $1,600 a month, or $2,500. So the potential is there, but I want to say that the vast majority of yoga studio owners are breaking even or in the red. At least the independent, locally owned ones. I've never worked in like a corporate yoga studio environment, so I don't know what the profit margins are there, but I do know that with local independently owned studios, a statistic I recently read was that only 4 out of every 100 yoga studios will make it to their 10th birthday. 4. Yeah. So like so most studio owners I know are working their ass off and barely scraping by, and mainly making a priority of paying their teachers and their rent and expenses, and then seeing what's left. And usually it's not much, so that's the reality of what we're working with. And also I want to acknowledge that, the biggest challenge, I would say from my view, at least what my teachers tell me, is like, they're not making enough money. Like what you just said is like, they're not making enough money in the studio. So that's the challenge here, is that like, I'm paying my teachers as much as possible given the revenues that are coming in, and yet it's not enough for them to, and I want to acknowledge that both you and I live in these markets that are hyper expensive, like, the most expensive markets in the United States, and probably in the top 5 or 10 in the world, is New York City and where I live in the Bay Area. So what I'd like to ask you, E, is what challenges or blockages do you feel yoga teachers face in terms of working together as a team with yoga studio owners, and also feeling seen and understood?
I think that it really, sort of what you said at the outset is that we need one another, but no one feels, I think there's a very funny dynamic that occurs around the money, which is that no one feels appreciated, right? The teachers don't feel appreciated enough because they don't get paid enough. And you can't do it without the teachers, right? And the studio owners don't feel appreciated because their teachers want more money, but the teachers don't understand what kind of expenses the studio owners are dealing with, because they've never signed a lease for $8,000, and they've never paid income tax, or rather employee tax, and they've never paid income tax. There's that one too, right? So they don't know like all of these expenditures. And so, and then I think the resentment historically has also built sort of around this notion that there was a burden of responsibility on the teachers to bring students to the studio, right? So it's like, you don't pay me enough, you don't appreciate me enough, and now you also want me to fill the classes that for which you're not going to pay me more for, by the way. It's kind of like, no. And so I think the biggest obstacle in a lot of ways is like, I think this conversation in a way may expose some of the realities, right? Particularly just knowing, if people listen to it, know that we're aware of it. And I think the biggest thing is like, how do you make the heart feel satisfied even if the wallet is not, right? And I mean, because let's be clear, none of us got in this business to get rich.
Because there could have been a ton of other choices we made to make a lot more money.
Yeah. If you were like, I want to make money, you would have been like, I'm going to be a yoga teacher. Yeah. What world are you living in? Now, when I got started teaching yoga, I thought it would be that way because I figured I didn't understand the pay scale. I figured it was a per head situation at every studio. And when I started teaching yoga in New York City in 2006, the wave was rising. Like the business was going up. It wasn't like, now it's crested and the tides are receding. Like we're also working in a market where everybody's attention is divided. Everybody has a class pass. People want to cross train, right? Yoga is no longer the hip thing, right? So, and by the way, I want to say that I think the upshot to that is that we're left with the cream of the crop. We're left with the best students. And so it can be tempting to be like, I'm upset about this, but but I think the challenge to us as teachers and yoga studio owners is to acknowledge that whoever's stuck around is committed, and to treat them like they're committed, not to treat them like, I wish there were 10 more of you here, 20 more of you here, but really to treat them like they have committed, because they have. Anyway, so point being, I think that if there was more done, if we did more for one another that made everybody feel like their heart was getting fed through the relationship, that would offset the fact that the money wasn't as wonderful. And I mean, I think all of us probably have these situations where you've stayed at a studio for too long because you loved the studio, you know? Back when you were a teacher, maybe you had that, right? Where you're like, wow, the money is kind of weird and the time isn't great, but I love the studio and I love the space and I love the owner and I love the students. And whatever I think we can do to improve the relationship, which is part of the reason we're having this conversation now, I think will fortify all of us for the long haul. Because I have a belief that the pendulum's going to swing back, right? The tides will turn again. People will be like, they'll be older and they'll be more broken, you know, and then they'll be like, help. And you'll be like, yoga. And they'll be like, right, I did it when I was in my 20s and I busted my shoulder and now I'm 45 or 50. And, you know, I think the tides will, the pendulum will swing back and we'll be there with all of this infrastructure and all of this knowledge and all of this experience in place to be like, hey, come to my party. And then we'll be there. So that's my vision, is that if we can fortify ourselves through some more heart space and finding some ways to, you know, fill in the gaps financially, that the relationship between the studio owners and the teachers will be improved, so the whole business won't fall apart, and then there will be no yoga to come back to when the tides turn, when the pendulum swings back.
Yeah, I want to bookmark this thing that you keep saying, which is like, how do we fortify ourselves and like connect, like really feel full and nourished in our hearts in our relationship? Because I feel like I want to swing back to it, but I want to first acknowledge a couple of the things that you've said that I feel ring really true from my perspective as a yoga studio owner. So one of them is that I see this as a major problem and I am totally guilty of this, that when I first opened my studio, I did have the story that my yoga teachers should be helping to fill the classroom. And I think this is a story that a ton of us find ourselves in, and mostly because we are ill-equipped when we open the studio to run a business. We come into this, like I came into yoga studio ownership without any experience as an entrepreneur besides just teaching. You know, I had been a full-time teacher for 10 years, but that's nothing compared to, you know, having in terms of running a business, you know, having rent and insurances and payroll taxes and all the things you mentioned. And so I did have that story, and I did pay my people per head with that story in mind, that, well, maybe if I pay them per head, they'll be more motivated to get people in the door. And what I realized is that, yes, that per head model worked for about 2 of my teachers, and they are more entrepreneurial minded, those 2 teachers, and they have sort of that charisma that like attracts people. But the truth is, most every single one of my yoga teachers and Pilates teachers on my staff are not trained business people. They're not trained in marketing, copywriting, you know, visibility, like all the things that I'm now trained in, which I wasn't trained in originally, you know? So how could I expect them to do all this heavy lifting to help me build my business? I'm the one who decided to go into business, you know, like, and so now in retrospect, I realize, that I was coming to it from actually like I don't know what to call that, like sort of like a not really a full understanding of like the 2 roles. And now I feel like I have a better grasp on what is my job and what is their job. Yeah. You know, and I'm really, what I hold them to and what I feel like is an integrity to hold them to is teaching an incredible class and connecting with their people, you know, with their students. And that's really the job of a yoga teacher. That's what they're trained to do. Whereas me now, years later, 8 years later, I am now trained as a business person because I've sought out training and mentorship, but most of the people that I work with have rarely, if ever, received any kind of small business training. So, that's one piece I want to acknowledge, is that I do feel like that could be a really big and important shift for us in our relationship, is understanding this is my job and this is your job. And can we respect?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it builds resentment, I think, on both sides. And I think some of the clarity of that too was even around things like staff meetings, like if you're not an employee, you can't, if I'm not your employee, if I'm a subcontractor, you cannot tell me to show up to a meeting, right? Yeah. And a lot of business owners didn't understand the nature of that relationship and would do things like, let's have a staff meeting. You'd be like, no. Am I getting paid for that staff meeting? I'm going to have to take my own time. I'm going to have to maybe get a babysitter in order to show up to the staff meeting. And I mean, one of the things that I've always appreciated about working for Pure Yoga in New York City is that from the get-go, we were employees because they already understood all these business models, right? They were a gym. All of us across the board were employees, and our only job ever was to show up and teach and go away, and nothing more. And I always felt that at that particular studio, there was no further burden of responsibility. And I appreciated that. And I knew that when they called a staff meeting, that they had a right to call a staff meeting because I'm an employee. They weren't going to pay me for the time. But, through being an employee, I also had access to other things that you don't have when you have access to when you're a subcontractor, like health insurance possibilities, right? So anyway, you had more things that you wanted to say, and I don't want to interrupt you. You were sort of in a flow. What else did you book?
No, I mean, the other pieces that I feel like you are already highlighted is definitely like, this is a piece that I feel a lot of my teachers don't understand when they're coming to me. I mean, I want to honor that. I really feel like I wish I could pay my teachers more, and I wish I could pay myself more as a yoga studio owner. I wish there was more money, because I do feel that we are offering something of such tremendous value, and it's not valued in our culture, and maybe we ourselves, I think a lot of us struggle with value, and so oftentimes as I come into these conversations with my staff around pay rates and such, as much as possible, I try to say yes. Like if it's smart for me, if I can afford it and they want to raise and they ask me, I try to say yes. But there have been times, of course, where I'm looking at the numbers and going, I'm so sorry, but like as valuable as you are as a human, your value as an employee does have a limit, because it's related to how much revenue is coming in and how many students you're getting in your classes. Because I base my pay is flat pay, but it's all definitely based on like student amount of students coming in. It's also tied into seniority, like how many years have you been doing this experience? And there's one other piece, which is how good are you at retaining your people? So those are like the three factors, but the main factor is how many students are coming, and that's to me. And so sometimes I've gotten into it with certain teachers around like, well, I'm like a senior teacher, I should be paid this much money, but like there's only 8 people coming to their class, So I just want to separate those two things, that there's your value as a human, which is actually infinite. And then there's your value as an employee that is related to the revenues that are coming in, And so those are two things that I have to hold differently, and because there is the reality of what I'm working with. And the other piece that you were talking about, which I want to say, is that, I was there's a couple instances I've had in the last 6 months talking to some different yoga teachers who are making some assumptions about the kind of expenses that we have, and they're false assumptions. So like one of them said to a group of people, and I was sitting in the group, well, if you charge less for yoga classes, you'll have that much more people. And her frustration was with how much yoga studios around here are charging. And I was just thinking, oh no, that's not how it works. That's not necessarily true, that if you charge less money, more people come. There's a whole psychology of that also. Like if you charge less money, oftentimes your audience perceives that there's less value, so they don't come, so that's sort of an interesting thing. So that's one piece. And then another teacher recently said to me, well, if your marketing dollars have attracted the student, but once they come in, it's really all me that has retained them. And so, once your marketing expenses are done, like I should be paid more, and I was thinking like my marketing expenses are like 5%, if that, of the revenue of my expenses, per month. Like the amount of expenses that I have is unfathomable to someone who's not, I spent $20,000 last year in credit card fees, like that's not even something that somebody would think about. I didn't think about it when I was a yoga teacher, so yeah, I do feel like that's a piece where there's kind of like not seeing eye to eye is like, no, it's not actually just the marketing expenses. That's like the smallest part of honestly my expenses. My expenses are my payroll and my rent, my insurances, the credit card transaction fees, all the taxes and stuff. So yeah, those are the pieces where I feel like I feel like yoga studio owners do not feel seen or appreciated for the amount of responsibility we're holding, nor the risk that we've taken on. Like I went into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt in order to create this space, and have taken on that responsibility for my future self to figure out how to pay that off, and luckily I've been able to do that. But, that was, the first 3 years of yoga studio ownership were the hardest years of my life, because the burden was so, so heavy. And I was in the red for so many months of each year, So yeah, I feel like, but I feel like what it boils down to, I think what we're getting at, the two of us together, is like, okay, so we all feel underpaid. That's part of it. And so, yeah, so what can we do to maybe have, be in our right roles, be in our right positions, for like a yoga teacher is responsible for this, a yoga studio owner is responsible for this. And also, how do we better our relationship with each other so that, like you said, it does feel more nourishing to our hearts, because if it was filling our hearts, then maybe that would make up for some of the challenges we all face, financially.
Yeah. I think for myself, there were a few steps that I took. And one was like, why was I burdening yoga in this way? The business of teaching yoga in this way, that it was unprepared to fulfill me. And I think it's because I came in with unreasonable expectations in a way. So that was, first of all, like within like a reality-based world, looking at the economics of it, looking at the marketplace, like I couldn't be angry at yoga for not giving me what I wanted. If it was more money, then I should stop teaching yoga and go do something that is clearly proven to provide more money, if that's the objective. And then look at the cost of that on me as a human, and look at the cost of that on my lifestyle, right? And I wasn't prepared to do that, right? Wasn't prepared to go back and like, I don't know. I've had so many people be like, you should have been a lawyer. I'm like, yes, probably, but at what cost to me, right?
Right.
So then it was, then to unburden yoga. And once I understood the economics that a studio has, to unburden the studio owner from my resentment, right? Just be like, the truth is, when they say, I wish we could pay you more, they are telling you the truth. That is not lip service. That is the truth. They are looking at the numbers. They're like, and you think, well, what's $5 more? And you're like, well, $5 more over a year across, a teaching staff of 50. At Pure, they have 55 teachers. Yeah, you're looking panicked right now. You're just doing the math in your head.
I mean,
like,
that's thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah.
thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But a $5 raise. And as a yoga teacher, we're like, what's $5? And you're like, well, let me tell you. And then, to really make a decision about, well, then where can I make more money, right? If it's not going to be at a studio, and I see that the studio serves its purpose, and I love teaching at a studio, then how can I build up my business in other ways? And the very swift answer has always been, get another private client. And I understand that not everybody wants to teach privates, but the reality is that's how you're going to make the majority of your living. Some people go and teach a lot of workshops and they teach retreats. I have a couple friends who really like the retreats, are sort of like what my yoga teacher, my yoga business teacher would call like the fiery money. It's the money that comes in fast and big, and then it's gone. That's a workshop. That's a teacher training. So it's a retreat, fast and big, and it's gone, and it might sustain you for a while, but once it's gone, right? There's no continuity to that. Some people do that, but all of that sort of hinges on like your personality, right? Are you the come away with me to Guatemala kind of person? Or are you the like, let's talk about your shoulder injuries sort of person, right? And I think that has to do with like what you can sustain over time also, how you're going to build a sustainable business. And I have to say, like, for me, a lot of this education also came from me running my own tiny satellite studio. It's a one class, once a week studio. And so I'm managing overhead, student leads, student attrition. I manage 2 assistants who I pay. And then all of these teachers that I'm training within that context. And I'd say if you as a yoga teacher think that the studio is screwing you, just find a rental space and rent the space for 1 class a week and see if you can put people in the room. And if you think you can do it better, go do it better, right? And just see what it feels like to pay rent on 1 class a week, to get people in the room, see what it feels like. And then you might be like, oh, it's really nice to just show up at a studio and teach.
Right.
Or you might be like, I'm really good at this. And then you'll go and just like become like a little studio runner. Like Lynn Beeger, who owned Back Bay Yoga in Boston for many, many years, her studio started out as one room and her. She rented the room, she filled the room. That's how it started. She just wanted to teach yoga, so she rented a room and taught yoga. That's the way it used to be, people. Like yoga teachers rented a studio in a dance school. They were like, let me rent for an hour and come and we do these weird stretches, right? And that's what we might end up back at, honestly.
I mean, maybe I want to say that, like, I feel like there's a reason that's kind of fallen out. And that is because there's so much, like you said before, competition for people's attention and their dollars. And like the boutique fitness options now are just like so limitless. There's so many, and so I feel like I think it's gotten more difficult to do that kind of thing, just to rent a space and then expect people to show up, without.
Well, you have to talk to people. Then you have to rent, you have to do sales, marketing, enrollment, take the payment, retainment. I'm actually going to be transitioning that little business into a partnership with my people who have been my apprentices for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be giving them all of those duties and responsibilities that I've been holding mm-hmm. as part of their business education. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And I feel like, so what you're saying is you're actually like, there's a part of your business that is like moving into, even though you don't own a brick and mortar space, you've been running parts of your business as an entrepreneur.
Correct.
and holding those skills of client attraction, retention, sales, enrollment, all that stuff, which like those are all completely different skill sets than what you learned in your yoga teacher training, which is what most yoga teachers are equipped with, what they learned in their yoga teacher training. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's true. And I appreciate you saying that, but like it, you know, if you feel like you can do it better, go do it, you know, like, because because you might, like, maybe you do have a little entrepreneur in you that wants to come forward, and that could be a way that you could serve at a higher level, you know, and perhaps be paid at a higher level. But I think for most of my people, you know, most of the teachers on my staff and most of the teachers that are working for my clients in my Thriving Studio Owner program, they do not think that way, and they don't want to. They want to show up and teach, and yet there's still a lot of that resentment, you know, and understanding. So yeah.
That was more like ease the resentment by finding out what it feels like to be on the other side.
Right.
Find out what it's like to run a studio. Even if it's a 1 day a week, 1 class studio, right? Which I've been running for 10 years. It's kind of a lot of years.
A lot of insight, I'm sure, you know.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of insight. I have a lot of insight about like the ebb and the flow of it. I have a lot of insight about, you know, Forrest yoga in New York also, you know, but so I think Kiki and I both believe that our industry would benefit from business education. And the yoga teachers would benefit from business education because, you know, you can show up at a studio and teach. However, a little bit of entrepreneurial flair will help you. I think it will. A little bit of understanding how to find private clients, what to do with them once you got them, you know, a little bit of understanding about social media is helpful. And none of us came into this wanting to be business mavens. Like, we came into this because we wanted to teach. And then all of a sudden you're saddled with this whole other world that you didn't want. But if you do want to just raise your education in this zone, Kiki and I both teach. Surprise. Kiki has her Thriving Studio Owner 12-week course. And I run something called the 5 Pillars 90-Day Accountability Program. So they're both 3-month courses. And I would call mine a crash course. Is yours sort of a crash course?
Yeah, I mean, mine, I say, fills in the gaps that I feel most yoga studio owners have. You know, it's like, the main challenges that my people face are cash flow. So that has to do with attracting new students, and then the process of conversion and retention. Like that's really the bulk of my entire program. And then we always weave in, because I personally feel this is 80% of a yoga studio owner's success, is their mindset and their beliefs. You know, as you know, if you believe that no one in your town gets it, and that like people just don't understand yoga and they don't value it, you don't even try these things. You wouldn't even be open to learning some new skills around marketing and around niching down, like I teach my people, and around nailing their message so it really strikes a heart chord in their ideal student. You know, you don't even try that if you have a belief that there's just not enough people in your town. You know, so that's an example. But I think
disempowering mindset.
Yeah, and I think another disempowering mindset that is huge amongst both yoga teachers and yoga studio owners is a lot of our feeling that money is bad, profit is evil. You know, for me, I've had to unpack a ton of my stuff around not just scraping by, but actually like amassing more wealth, like actually letting money grow, because I had become so accustomed as a yoga teacher for 10 years before I owned my studio. And then in those first few years of studio ownership, just scraping by, like barely making ends meet, you know, and I was kind of addicted to working hard and barely scraping by. And so it's been a real process for me of like unearthing those limiting beliefs around money, around being the boss, around taking myself seriously as a business person. Because I feel like in the yoga industry, it's kind of thought of as like business people, like less than yogis, like if, like I feel like there's a real story that like for me, it took a lot of courage for me to come out of the closet as an entrepreneur, because I knew amongst my yoga friends, that's looked down upon. And that it's more value to be of service, and to which of course I value. I value being of service, but I also really own now my skills and my interest in business strategy, that I love that, and that I really light up around it. So this is what I teach my mentees, is like how to own their like inner strategist, and not feel like they have to keep them in the closet. It's like take yourself seriously as a business owner, because if you don't, no one is served by that. Not you, not your family, not your yoga teachers, not your potential students, your future students, who will never hear about you unless you take yourself seriously. So we work a lot on, what it takes to get the kind of cash flow that is actually supportive to both your staff and yourself, but also all the mindset stuff, as you're going into these higher levels of profit, you face all your stuff, around why you can't have that, or what that, what that means. If I'm going to make that much more money, I'll have to work that much harder. That's a very common limiting belief that my people have, is you have to work so much harder. Which, that was, when I was an employee, that was what I had to do, is I had to work more hours to make more money. But the truth is, if you do that as a studio owner, you actually start to put a cap on what you can do, what you can make. You have to learn how to work smarter, and
I think that's the difference between a solopreneurship and a business, right? So like I am basically like a solopreneur. So that the truth is, I work more to make more money. But when you have a business, which involves more people and staff, you actually should work less, and all of the business should do more, so that there is more. It's a scalable thing. And I think what you were saying about the corporate like yoga model is, I think they make more by scaling. Instead of one location, they have 5 locations. So the expenses are spread out and there's more volume, right? So it all kind of like all lifts. That is my thought.
Yes, but I want to acknowledge that piece too, is that the only reason I'm making good money finally as a yoga studio owner is because we have scaled. So like when we first started, we had say 35 offerings a week, and I taught most of them. I taught like 23 of them or 25 of them when we first started. And now we have like 120 offerings per week between all of the privates that we have, because we have privates in-house, as well as our 55 classes a week. So it's not that there's a huge profit margin on any individual hour at my studio. And I think this is really across the board for most yoga studio businesses, is there's not a huge profit margin when you just look at an individual hour. You have to scale big in order to make more money as a business owner. You just have to have your hand in the pot of that many more hours of time.
Yep. And that, I think, is a wise use of your space too, right? Because basically your biggest expense in a lot of ways is your space. And if the space is sitting empty, it's not making money.
Yeah. I mean, my biggest expense is actually payroll, but it's true that I want to leverage my space and use it. There's only a certain amount of hours of the day, and we charge per hour.
Right.
Per service. So we want as many services as possible.
Here comes my cat. Hi, Simone. What are we doing?
Okay, for folks who are watching this who are yoga teachers, can you tell them more about how they could work with you in that 90-day accountability program?
Sure. Yeah. I run it live once a year, and it's coming up pretty soon. It's coming up in July. I think we're going to start on the 9th, but I might shove that back a week. So the enrollment is simple. You contact me, you let me know that you're interested. And the curriculum is we have a live content call every other week, and you'll get one live coaching call per month. Right. So it's a 90-day accountability program, and basically it's a crash course in many of the things that you never learned about business as a yoga teacher. And you get also then through my live coaching, my strategy, and we'll build out ideas for how you're going to make some more money. Which some of it's just like get a private client. You might hear me say that, get a private client. How are you going to get a private client? We're going to talk about that. And so you'll get my strategy mind around that. And a lot of, I think I do ongoing mentorship with solopreneurs. Many of them I've been working with for years. And I think that they've generated a lot of great new ideas with me that they've launched. And you also get what you get when you talk to me is you get just like concrete stuff about, well, I have this private client and here's what's happening and I'm not sure what to do. And I'll talk to you about that, because managing a personal client relationship is a skill. It's a skill set. How do you manage that person? How do you build a relationship where there's a very intimate relationship around money with that person? And sometimes they will bump up against you around money. So you reach out to me. It's called the 5 Pillars 90-Day Accountability Program. And the 5 pillars are basically the 5 pillars of Forrest Yoga, and they're anchored on business mindsets and business skills that you need. So we're going to put together the Forrest Yoga sort of foundational principles with business principles. So it will help you see how these things go together, and that business is actually like very organic in a lot of ways. Business is about relationships. Business is about skill sets. It shouldn't be scary. You just need some more skills. That's all. So the program will run July, August, September, and you'll get a workbook, because a lot of what's challenging for us as yoga teachers is organizing our time. And so organizing time and seeing where your money is actually coming from and where it's not. And then deciding how to spend your time based on how are you going to have cash flow. And you've heard Kiki say the words cash flow and me say the words cash flow. And that's basically what a business is made out of, cash flow. If you don't have cash flow, you don't have a business. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. And the truth is, the reason, I just want to like put it back into context, going back into overview. The reason we want more money is because the more money in our bank accounts means the more lives we are transforming. So when Erica and I are hitting this from a business perspective, we also have in mind the bigger goal, which is to have as much impact as possible, and to help our people and help the people in our community, including ourselves, because we are people in our community, So I think a lot of us who are in this, we get a little mixed up with like, we want to be of service, and so we give. But at a certain point, if you're not making enough money, if you're not getting that return on the amount of love and expertise and time that you are giving to your service, whether your service is to run a studio or teach a private session, then it starts to be out of integrity. Like there has to be an energetic exchange that feels around the same, and really the money is just a representation of the exchange of what's happening. You're giving this huge amount of value to your students' life. Like really, like we couldn't even charge enough for the value that we're giving to our people's life. And the money needs to support that exchange. And if it doesn't, it starts to feel out of integrity. So for me, that's a way I've allied with money. And with scaling the way I have is like the more money in my bank account, the more impact I'm having, the more lives I'm transforming. And and I think it's really important to keep that in perspective, because I think for a lot of us in the yoga field, otherwise it starts to feel kind of slippery and slimy. And that's exactly why we got into yoga, is to like not have that kind of energy, So, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my yoga business coach, he cleared up some misconceptions for me about greed. And I think that there's a difference between knowing your value and knowing what you need in terms of money in order to be able to be present in the world in a way that is helpful to yourself and all the people around you. And basically, greed is wanting something you haven't earned, right? And we have all earned our right to ask for some money. We have. You have not earned it.
Wait, I kind of need you to repeat that, because I feel like I need to hear it again, but I'm sure some of my yoga studio owner friends need to hear that again.
Greed is wanting things you have not earned.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like when I think about that, I think I'm deeply underpaid. Like, I feel like when I think about that, because I've worked so hard to create the salary that I've created for myself, which I'm very grateful for, but like, have I earned that? Yeah, I've earned that times 100.
Earned that. You have
times 100. Yeah.
I think a lot of times people see what we do and they're shocked at how much we work, right? Shocked at how much we work. We work a lot, right? I met someone recently and he's like, "What are you doing today?" And I was like, "Brace yourself." And then I wrote it and he was like, "Wasn't braced enough for that."
Right.
It was like, yeah. And then it was like, "You work hard." And it's like, yeah, I work hard. I don't make a lot of money. I mean, by a national standard, I make a lot of money. I don't make a lot of money for New York City though. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's just it. But nobody held a gun to my head and said, live in New York City. So I'm not complaining, right?
Exactly.
It's very clear. Like, I own the fact that I live in New York City. I could live anywhere else in the world I wanted to. I'm a single, unmarried, childless woman. I could go anywhere. Right? So I think also just one of the things that we as yoga people need to do, particularly also around this next level of business, is be very clear that no one forced us to do this.
Yep.
And because no one forced us to do this, we can't make everybody else responsible for the things that we don't like about it.
Right.
Right? If you don't like it, go do something else. If you don't like it, change it. But be empowered. Never be a victim of this. Be like, oh, I don't make it as much money as I want. What am I going to do about that?
Right. Rather than just sitting in
change that narrative.
Yeah. Huh? Rather than just sitting in that state of blame,
Yes.
Which I think comes from both sides. I think the teachers and the studio owners, in a way, I guess it's just human nature. When something's not working, you look for the reason why, and usually you don't look inward at first. You usually look at who is responsible for this, I think it's important to acknowledge, there are parts of it that you can make different choices around, and I think the bigger tide that I would love to see turning is that really all of us have colluded with the idea that yoga is not that valuable. We've all set our drop-ins to be $20 to $30, if that. A lot of my studio owners I work with are charging $13 a drop-in, and maybe in their community that's right, but right. Well, that's the thing. So I feel like we've colluded. Yeah, we've colluded with.
We've created the problem that we have.
Yeah, we've created it and colluded with it, and so I think that's the piece that I think you and I are really good at, is really, really understanding and educating our trainees and our mentees on which parts of this we can take responsibility for right now, in our lives. And yes, there are larger factors, but it starts with us. It starts with us owning our value. It starts with us charging our worth. Yeah. And the truth is we could never charge as much as what we're giving. That's what I always think, is I'm teaching the art of transformation. I couldn't even charge enough money for this huge amount of value I'm bringing to my people's lives, So yeah, I think owning your value and charging your worth is really, really half the battle. And that's, I'm always trying to get my studio owner mentees to raise their rates. It's like, if that's important, and I know that brings up a lot of questions people have about accessibility and about, I think that's like the biggest challenge that people have is, well, if I'm going to raise my rates, it doesn't allow all these people access, so there's a lot to unpack there. Maybe that'll be our next topic, but yeah.
I can talk about that next time. Because we clearly like to talk about this, because we've been talking for far longer than I think we intended to.
I know.
Which I love. I mean, and Simone's like, will you play with me now?
Okay, so let's wrap it up. So I'm gonna put
yeah.
we'll put in the comments below this video Erica's contact info. And then I'll also leave my contact info for any of you guys who are studio owners who are ready to take yourself more seriously as a studio owner and combine soul and mindset with actual real life strategy that helps you grow your revenues and grow your impact. I will leave a contact for setting up a free business breakthrough call with me. This is a call where I get to know potential mentees, and we suss out what are your goals for your income, for your time freedom, like what kind of life do you want to live as a business person and studio owner, and what's it going to take for you to get there. And if at the end of the call you feel like I'm a good fit for you, and I feel like you're coachable and my program can support you in those goals, then I may invite you to be one of the mentees I take on this month. So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Erica, for being here. And yes, talk to you all soon in our next yoga business heartbeat talk.
Heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom. All right.
Thanks.
Love ya.
Okay, love you too. Mwah.
Talk soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks. All right, bye.